What if your job required you to get dressed in front of an audience of nobles every single morning? What if your every meal was a public performance with hundreds of eyes watching each bite you took? Could you spend 5 hours a day just answering letters and signing state documents, knowing a single mistake could lead to war? For the women who ruled empires, this was not imagination. It was just Tuesday. Their daily lives were a strange mix of extreme luxury and crushing responsibility, of mind-numbing ritual and high-stakes politics. Forget the fairy tales. The reality of being a queen was more bizarre and demanding than we can ever truly grasp. Number 20 was Marie Antoinette's morning routine just a performance? She owned a functioning farm, complete with perfumed sheep, where she and her friends would pretend to be milkmaids. Her hairdresser once created a 3-foot-tall hairstyle depicting a French warship, complete with cannons that fired smoke. The phrase, "let them eat cake," was almost certainly never said by her. It was a piece of political propaganda. She spent more on dresses in a single year than a skilled laborer could earn in a lifetime. Marie Antoinette's day began not with an alarm, but with a whisper. Around 8:30 a.m., her first lady-in-waiting would enter the Queen's lavish bedroom at the Palace of Versailles and murmur, "Madam, it is time." This was the start of a ritual so complex, so governed by etiquette, that it was a daily piece of theater. It was called the levee, or the rising. First came the private moments. The Queen would say her prayers and be brought a book. Then the doors were open to the privileged few. The royal doctors, her secretary, and a handful of personal servants would enter. She would wash her hands and face from a silver bowl, a task performed by a high-ranking lady. Then breakfast was served. This was simple, usually just coffee or hot chocolate and a roll. But the real performance was the dressing ceremony. This was a public event. Dozens of aristocrats, all vying for position and favor, would crowd into her chambers. The right to hand the Queen her chemise was the most coveted honor. The highest-ranking duchess present had this privilege. If a more senior duchess entered the room halfway through, the chemise would be taken from the first lady and given to the newcomer to present. The Queen would simply stand there waiting as this transfer of clothing and power took place. Every single item of clothing was handed to her in this way, following a strict pecking order. Her stockings, her petticoats, her gown, it was a slow, deliberate process designed to reinforce the social hierarchy of the court. After the dressing, it was time for her hair. The royal hairdresser, Leonard Auty, would arrive to create one of his famous towering styles. These creations were often held together with wireframes, pomade made from animal fat, and clouds of white powder. They were so tall, she sometimes had to kneel on the floor of her carriage to fit. By midday, the Queen was finally ready for her public duties. The first was attending Mass in the royal chapel. This was another performance. The entire court would watch her walk from her apartments to the chapel, a procession of silk, jewels, and powdered wigs. After Mass, she held audiences. She would meet with ambassadors, receive petitions, and listen to the concerns of her subjects, all under the watchful eye of the court. A lunch, like everything else, was a public affair called the Grand Couvert. The king and queen would eat their midday meal at a table set up in one of the grand halls. Anyone who was decently dressed could come and watch them. They would eat course after course of elaborate dishes served on gold and silver plates, while hundreds of people stood behind a barrier, silently observing every bite. It was less a meal and more a display of royal power and wealth. Marie Antoinette apparently hated it. She often ate very little, conscious of the eyes on her. The afternoon offered a small escape. This was her time for personal pursuits. She might retire to her private apartments in the Petit Trianon, a smaller palace on the grounds of Versailles. Here, the strict etiquette was relaxed. She could read, play the harp, or walk in her English-style gardens. This was where she had her model village, the Hameau de la Reine, built. She and her closest friends would dress in simple cotton dresses and pretend to be commoners, milking cows and collecting eggs. It was a fantasy of a simpler life, far from the suffocating pressures of the court. Her evenings were filled with social obligations. There might be a formal reception, a game of cards for high stakes, or a theatrical performance. The queen loved the theater and even acted in plays herself in her private theater at the Trianon. After the public entertainment, she would have a more private supper with her family or close friends. Finally, late at night, the day ended with a ritual that mirrored the morning, the coucher or the going to bed ceremony. Once again, the court would assemble to watch the queen undress. The same strict rules of etiquette applied, with high-ranking ladies having the honor of removing her jewelry and gown. After the public had been dismissed, she would spend a few moments with her children before finally being alone. Her entire day, from the moment she woke until she slept, was lived on a stage, every action dictated by centuries of tradition. Number 19, did Queen Elizabeth I rule England from her desk? She owned over 2,000 intricate gowns, but was known to wear the same simple dress for days when she was working hard. She took a bath about once a month, which was considered exceptionally clean for the era. She spoke at least 6 languages fluently, including Latin, Greek, French, and Italian, and would often scold foreign ambassadors in their own tongue. The iconic white makeup she wore was a toxic mixture of white lead and vinegar called ceruse, which slowly damaged her skin over the decades. And Elizabeth I's day was a masterclass in control. She was the CEO of England, and her schedule reflected that. She typically rose early, around 6 a.m. The first hour of her day was for private prayer and devotion. Religion was central to her life and her rule, and this quiet time was non-negotiable. After prayers came the lengthy and elaborate process of getting dressed. This was not simply putting on clothes, it was constructing an image of power. Her ladies-in-waiting, all from noble families, would attend to her. The process involved multiple layers of camise, a corset stiffened with wood or whalebone, a petticoat, a farthingale, a hoop skirt to give her dress its shape, and finally the magnificent gown itself. Then came the intricate lace collar that framed her face. Her red gold hair, a Tudor trademark, was carefully arranged and often supplemented with a wig. Finally, the application of her makeup, the stark white face and red lips were a deliberate choice to project an image of ageless virginity and authority. The whole process could take up to 2 hours. Once she was dressed, she had a light breakfast, often just some ale and bread. Then, the workday began. Elizabeth was not a figurehead, she was an incredibly hands-on ruler. She would spend 3 to 4 hours every morning with her principal secretary, men like William Cecil, and later his son Robert. They would sit at a desk, surrounded by piles of documents. She read state papers, intelligence reports from her spy network, petitions from her subjects, and diplomatic correspondence from across Europe. She had a sharp mind and a keen eye for detail. She would dictate letters, her words carefully chosen to flatter, threaten, or persuade. She would sign laws and royal decrees with her distinctive, bold signature. This was the engine room of her government, and she was firmly at the helm. The main meal of the day was dinner, served around noon. Like at the French court, this was often a public spectacle. The food was brought to her in a grand procession. Dozens of dishes would be presented to her, but she herself ate sparingly. She was known to be a small eater, preferring simple foods. The purpose of the meal was not to feast, but to be seen. It was a display of stability and majesty. Ambassadors and courtiers would watch, taking note of her mood and health. Afternoons were for a variety of activities. She might attend a meeting of the Privy Council, her group of trusted advisors, to debate policy on everything from taxation to foreign wars. She was an active participant in these debates, known for her sharp questions and decisive opinions. If the weather was good, she would insist on getting outside. She was a superb horsewoman and loved to ride. She also enjoyed walking in the palace gardens. This was not just leisure, it was a way to maintain her health and project an image of vigor. A sickly monarch was a weak monarch. She also dedicated time to her own intellectual pursuits. She was a gifted linguist and would spend time translating classical texts from Latin or Greek into English. She was also a talented musician, playing the lute and the virginals, a type of harpsichord. These moments were a respite from the pressures of statecraft. Evenings were for court life. There might be dancing and activity Elizabeth adored even into her old age. There could be mascots, which were elaborate theatrical performances with music, dancing, and fantastical costumes. She also enjoyed playing cards and chess. This was not just entertainment. Court was where politics happened. You know, it was where she could gauge the mood of her nobles, distribute patronage, and gather information. A casual conversation during a card game could be as important as a formal council meeting. She would have a light supper and then prepare for bed. The elaborate process of undressing was the reverse of the morning ritual. After a final prayer, she would retire. Her days were long and demanding, a constant balancing act between the intense private work of governing and the exhausting public performance of being a queen. She ruled for over 44 years, and her disciplined routine was the foundation of that long and successful reign. Number 18, how did Queen Victoria turn grief into a daily job? She proposed to Prince Albert, not the other way around, as royal protocol forbade him, a minor German prince, from proposing to a reigning British monarch. She was the first member of the royal family to use a train. She spoke fluent German and often wrote in her diary in a mix of English and German. After Albert's death, she had his clothes laid out for him every single evening for 40 years. Queen Victoria's life can be split into two distinct daily routines before Albert and after Albert. In her youth and early marriage, her days were vibrant, filled with passion, work, and a growing family. After his death in 1861, her routine became a rigid, unchanging monument to her grief. Let's look at the post-Albert years, the period for which she is most famous. Her day began around 8 a.m. She would wake and have a simple breakfast in her room, often porridge. The first task of every single day was to engage with the memory of her husband. She would visit the Blue Room, Albert's former sitting room, which was kept exactly as he had left it. She would look at his portraits and reflect. Then the workday started. Victoria was an incredibly diligent monarch. She was brought the boxes, red leather dispatch boxes, filled with government documents, telegrams, and letters from across the British Empire. She would sit at her desk for hours, reading, annotating, and signing papers. She had a particular spidery handwriting that ministers often struggled to read. She corresponded directly with her prime ministers, offering advice, criticism, and strong opinions. She might not have had direct power to make laws, but her influence was immense. She saw it as her constitutional duty to be informed about every aspect of her government. Lunch was a formal affair, even if it was just with her children or ladies in waiting. She was a notoriously fast eater. Her guests had to keep pace because as soon as the queen put down her fork, the plates were cleared, whether you were finished or not. Many a guest went hungry at Victoria's table. The afternoons were structured and varied. She might take a carriage ride around her estate, either at Windsor, Balmoral in Scotland, or Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. She was a keen artist and would often spend time sketching or painting watercolors in her private studio. She was also a prolific diarist. She wrote an estimated 2,500 words a day, filling 122 volumes over her lifetime. Her diaries were a place to record not just state affairs, but her personal feelings, her loneliness, and her unwavering devotion to Albert. A key part of her afternoon routine, especially at Balmoral, was visiting the cottages of her tenants. She would sit with local families, drink tea, and inquire about their lives. She had a genuine interest in the lives of ordinary people, a trait that endeared her to the public. Evenings were highly ritualized. Dinner was another formal meal. Afterwards, there might be music. The queen loved the opera and would invite singers to perform for her. She also enjoyed playing card games or simply talking with her family, but the shadow of Albert was always present. A bust of him was often placed on the dinner table. An empty chair was kept for him at many gatherings. The end of her day was as poignant as its beginning. Before going to bed, she would return to Albert's room. His valet would have laid out his evening clothes and filled a jug with hot water for his shaving, just as they had when he was alive. This ritual continued for 4 decades. Her day was bookended by her husband's memory. It was a life of public duty and private sorrow, a routine that allowed her to function as the head of a global empire while nursing a grief that never faded. Her daily schedule was her armor, a predictable structure in a world that lost its center. Number 17 was Catherine the Great's power fueled by coffee. She was not Russian by birth, but a German princess named Sophie. She learned Russian so diligently that she reportedly used to walk barefoot in her cold bedroom at night, repeating her lessons, which gave her a severe case of pneumonia. She was a correspondent of the French philosopher Voltaire for 15 years, exchanging hundreds of letters, though they never met. She founded the Hermitage Museum, which began as her personal art collection. Catherine the Great's day was built on a foundation of iron self-discipline and intellectual curiosity. Her routine was that of a hardworking executive, not a pampered royal. She rose incredibly early, often between 5 and 6 a.m. She claimed she couldn't sleep any longer. She lit her own fire, a task usually left to servants, because she didn't want to disturb anyone. The first order of business was coffee, and it was famously strong. Her personal chef was said to use a full pound of coffee beans to make just 5 cups. It was so potent that a visitor who once tried it reportedly had a dangerously elevated pulse for hours. This powerful brew fueled the first part of her day work. For several hours, alone in her study, she would read and write. She tackled state papers, drafted laws, and read reports from her governors and generals across the vast Russian Empire. This was also the time she dedicated to her intellectual projects. She read the works of Enlightenment thinkers, wrote plays, and worked on her memoirs. She was a true intellectual who saw herself as an enlightened despot, a ruler guided by reason and philosophy. This quiet, early morning work session was the source of many of her most ambitious reforms. Around 9 a.m., her official day began. Her secretaries and ministers would arrive. She would hold meetings, dictate orders, and listen to reports. She was known for being a good listener, but also for her sharp intellect and decisive nature. She could quickly grasp complex issues and was not afraid to make difficult decisions. After the morning's work, she would get dressed for the day. Unlike the elaborate ceremonies of the French court, Catherine's dressing was relatively simple and quick. She preferred comfortable, simple gowns for her daily life, saving the grand outfits for state occasions. The midday meal was served around 1 p.m. She was a moderate eater and drank very little alcohol, usually just a single glass of wine. She often invited interesting people to join her for lunch, writers, scientists, philosophers, and military leaders. The conversation was the main event. She loved a lively debate and encouraged her guests to speak freely. The afternoons were a mix of public duties and personal interests. She might review her troops, inspect a new building project, or work on her beloved art collection. The Hermitage started as a small extension to the Winter Palace to house the paintings she was acquiring from all over Europe. She would spend hours personally arranging and cataloging her treasures. She also loved her gardens and took an active interest in their design and maintenance. Evenings were for relaxation and socializing. She would often host small, informal gatherings in her private apartments, known as her hermitages. The rules for these parties were famously written on a sign at the door: "Leave your rank outside and your hat, but not your sword. Sit down, stand up, or walk about as you please, regardless of the Empress." These were evenings of card games, charades, and witty conversation. She wanted to be surrounded by clever and amusing people, a break from the formalities of court. She usually retired to bed by 10 or 11 p.m. Her days were long, productive, and intellectually stimulating. She ran a massive empire with the same focused energy she applied to her morning coffee. Her routine was a testament to her belief that power was not just a birthright, but a job that required dedication, intelligence, and an endless capacity for work. Number 16. Did Empress Cixi rule China from behind a silk screen? She was the only woman to rule China in all but name for nearly 50 years. She started her life in the Forbidden City as a low-ranking concubine. She was a skilled painter and calligrapher, and her works were highly sought after. She had a specially built private train, complete with yellow silk curtains and plush armchairs, which she used for inspections. The daily life of Empress Dowager Cixi was a spectacle of immense power and rigid tradition, all conducted within the secretive walls of the Forbidden City in Beijing. Her day began long before sunrise, sometimes as early as 3 a.m. While the city slept, the palace was a hive of activity. Hundreds of eunuchs and ladies-in-waiting would begin their preparations. Cixi herself would be woken around 5 a.m. The first ritual was dressing. This was an incredibly complex process. Her maids would help her into layers of embroidered silk robes. The color and design of her robes were chosen based on the day, the season, and the specific occasion. She had a particular fondness for luxurious fabrics and intricate designs. Her hair was a major focus. It was carefully washed with a special mixture, then styled into an elaborate coiffure decorated with jewels, fresh flowers, and pearls. Her fingernails were famously long, protected by decorative gold and jade nail guards. The entire process of getting ready could take several hours, and breakfast was a grand affair. It was said that over 100 dishes were prepared for her morning meal alone. They were brought to her from the imperial kitchens on dozens of trays. She would sit at a table and inspect them all. And a eunuch would stand by to taste each dish with a silver needle to check for poison. Cixi herself would only eat a small portion from a few selected dishes. The rest was a display of imperial wealth and a precaution against assassination. The most important part of her day began around 8 a.m. This was the morning audience. As a woman, Cixi could not rule openly. For most of her reign, she ruled from behind a yellow silk screen. The young emperor, her son, and later her nephew, would sit on the throne in front of the screen. Ministers and officials would present their reports to the emperor, but the real power was listening, unseen, behind him. Cixi would whisper her instructions to the emperor, or interrupt to ask sharp questions and issue commands. It was a political theater that preserved tradition while allowing her to exercise absolute authority. She had a formidable grasp of politics and a powerful memory, often surprising her ministers with her detailed knowledge of state affairs. After the audience, she would dedicate time to managing the vast and complex affairs of the inner court. This was like running a small city with thousands of inhabitants. She would also review petitions, approve appointments, and deal with family matters. The afternoon was for her personal pleasures. Cixi was a great patron of the arts. She loved Chinese opera and had a theater built in the summer palace where she would watch performances for hours. She was also a talented artist herself, practicing calligraphy and painting, often with the help of court artists who would touch up her work. She also loved her dogs, a pack of Pekingese that she treated like royalty, with their own dedicated eunuchs to care for them. She would often take a walk or be carried in a sedan chair through the magnificent palace gardens. She took a great interest in horticulture and had a vast greenhouse built to supply her with fresh flowers and fruit year-round. The evening meal was another extravagant display, similar to breakfast. Afterwards, there might be more opera or storytelling. Cixi would listen to stories and historical accounts read aloud by her eunuchs. Her bedtime routine was as elaborate as her morning one. It involved a lengthy process of undressing, having her hair brushed, and a massage. She paid great attention to her skincare, using a special cream made of powdered pearls. By 9 p.m., the Empress Dowager would retire, and a deep silence would fall over the Forbidden City. Her daily routine was a perfect reflection of her rule, a blend of rigid tradition, hidden power, and opulent display. Number 15 was Queen Christina of Sweden's Life, a Rebellion Against Routine. She was raised as a prince, receiving an education in politics, classics, and fencing, which was unheard of for a girl in the 17th century. She refused to marry, famously declaring she was married to philosophy. She caused a massive scandal by abdicating her throne at the age of 27 to convert to Catholicism. She spent much of her later life in Rome, where she became a major patron of the arts and music. Christina of Sweden's daily routine was a deliberate rejection of everything expected of a 17th century queen. It was unpredictable, intellectual, and utterly unconventional. She despised the tedious rituals of court life and organized her day around her own passions, learning, and power. She had a habit of sleeping very little, often just 3 to 4 hours a night. She would frequently wake in the middle of the night to read or study. Her official day, however, began early. She would rise and dress quickly, favoring simple masculine-style clothing over the restrictive gowns worn by other royal women. She often wore flat shoes and rarely bothered with elaborate hairstyles. Comfort and practicality were more important to her than fashion. The majority of her morning was dedicated to work and study. She would spend hours with her ministers, discussing state affairs with an intelligence that often intimidated them. She was a hands-on ruler who read every document and made her own decisions. But her real passion was her library. She had amassed one of the most impressive collections of books and manuscripts in Europe. She invited scholars and philosophers from all over the continent to her court. The most famous of these was the French philosopher René Descartes. Her schedule with Descartes was famously demanding. She insisted he meet her in her cold library at 5 a.m. to discuss philosophy. The harsh Swedish winter and the early hours were a shock to Descartes' system, and many believe this punishing routine contributed to the pneumonia that led to his death. For Christina, however, these intellectual sparring sessions were the most important part of her day. She craved knowledge and debate more than anything else. She had little patience for the formal meals that dominated other courts. She ate quickly and simply, often while continuing to read or talk with her scholars. She found the elaborate etiquette of royal dining to be a waste of time. She saw food as fuel for her mind, not an opportunity for social display. Afternoons were often spent on more active pursuits. She was an excellent horsewoman and a skilled hunter. She would ride for hours, often outpacing the men in her hunting party. This was another way she defied gender expectations. She was physically fearless and reveled in activities that were considered exclusively male. Her evenings were not for frivolous court entertainment. She disliked balls and formal parties. Instead, she would host intellectual salons. Her court became known as the Athens of the North. She would gather her favorite scholars, artists, and musicians for evenings of intense discussion, debate, and performance. They would discuss everything from ancient Greek philosophy to the latest scientific discoveries. She also founded Sweden's first Academy of Arts and Sciences. Christina's routine was a direct challenge to the norms of her time. She prioritized intellect over appearance, work over ceremony, and personal freedom over royal duty. Her daily life was a constant pursuit of knowledge and a rejection of the gilded cage of royalty. Eventually, this rejection became absolute. She decided that the duties of a queen were incompatible with the life she wanted to live. Her abdication was the ultimate expression of her unconventional routine. She chose to schedule her own life, free from the demands of a crown. Number 14. Did Maria Theresa govern an empire from her boudoir? She was the mother of 16 children, including Marie Antoinette, and yet she never stopped running the Austro-Hungarian Empire. She was the only female ruler in the 650-year history of the Habsburg dynasty. She negotiated with generals and ministers while getting her hair done. She was a devoted wife in a rare royal love match with her husband Francis I, but she was always the one in charge. Maria Theresa's day was a masterclass in multitasking. She was simultaneously the ruler of a sprawling, complex empire and the matriarch of a huge family. Her routine was a relentless blend of statecraft, motherhood, and religious devotion, often happening all at the same time. Her day started early with private prayers. She was a devout Catholic, and her faith was the bedrock of her life. After her prayers, the business of government began immediately, often before she was even out of bed. Her ministers and secretaries would be admitted to her private chambers. She would sit up in bed, wrapped in a dressing gown, reading reports, dictating letters, and issuing orders. The process of getting dressed was not a time for relaxation. It was another work session. While her ladies-in-waiting arranged her hair and helped her into her gown, she would continue her meetings. She famously discussed military strategy with her generals while a hairdresser worked on her elaborate coiffure. She did not have time to waste. Every minute of her day was scheduled and utilized. She separated the different aspects of her life into different rooms of the palace, moving from one to the next as she ticked off the tasks on her formidable mental to-do list. After a simple breakfast, she would attend Mass. Then, more meetings. She presided over the Council of State, where she was known for her common sense, her attention to detail, and her deep understanding of her empire's finances. She was not a brilliant military strategist herself, but she was excellent at choosing the right people for the job and holding them accountable. The lunch was her main family time. She would dine with her husband and as many of her children as were at court. These were lively, often chaotic meals. Maria Theresa was a loving but strict mother. She was deeply involved in her children's education, health, and moral upbringing. She wrote them long letters full of advice and instruction when they were away from court. The afternoon was a continuation of her work. She would grant audiences, review architectural plans for new buildings, and work on her many reforms. She reformed the army, the civil service, and the educational system. She believed in ruling for the good of her people, and her policies reflected that. Despite her immense workload, she made time for her husband Francis. Their marriage was a genuine partnership. While she held the power, she valued his opinion, and he supported her role. They would often take walks together in the palace gardens in the late afternoon, a rare moment of quiet in her hectic day. Evenings were a mix of work and family. She would often have a light supper with her family, followed by more letter writing or reading of state papers. She rarely engaged in the frivolous court entertainments popular in other parts of Europe. She found them wasteful. She might listen to some music or play cards with her children, but her mind was never far from the business of the empire. Maria Theresa's routine was exhausting to even contemplate. She managed to run a vast empire and raise a large family with incredible efficiency. Her ability to blend the political and the personal was her greatest strength. She governed her empire with the same pragmatic, no-nonsense authority she used to run her household. For Maria Theresa, the boudoir was just another boardroom. Number 13, did Cleopatra's beauty routine involve more politics than pampering? She was not Egyptian. She was of Greek descent, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty. She was the first ruler in her family to learn the Egyptian language, a savvy political move that endeared her to her subjects. She was a highly educated woman who studied at the Mausoleum in Alexandria, a center of learning that included the famous Library of Alexandria. She personally commanded her own naval fleet in battle. Cleopatra's daily routine was a calculated mix of governance, scholarship, and political theater. Her famous beauty rituals were not just about vanity. They were an essential part of her public image, a tool she used to project power and divinity. Her day likely began early at the royal palace in Alexandria. This city was a bustling, multicultural hub of trade and learning. Her morning would have started not with servants, but with scholars. She would spend time reading, studying, and engaging in intellectual debate. She was fluent in as many as 9 languages and was well versed in mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. This intellectual prowess was a key part of her authority. She was not just a queen, she was a scholar ruler in the Hellenistic tradition. After her studies, the famous beauty rituals would begin. These were elaborate and used the finest ingredients available. She was known to bathe in milk, which was believed to soften the skin due to its lactic acid. Her eye makeup, the thick black kohl liner, was not just for cosmetic effect. It was believed to have magical healing properties and to ward off eye infections, a common problem in the dusty Egyptian climate. The ingredients like galena also had mild antibacterial properties. Her makeup was a statement. It connected her to the ancient traditions of Egyptian pharaohs and the goddess Isis, whom she claimed to embody. Once her appearance was perfected, the business of ruling began. She would hold court, receiving petitions from her people. The fact that she could speak to them in their own language without an interpreter was a massive political advantage. It built a direct connection with her subjects that her predecessors lacked. She would also meet with her ministers to discuss the economy, which was largely based on the grain trade from the fertile Nile Delta. She was an astute economic manager, and under her rule, Egypt was the richest nation in the Mediterranean. The midday meal would have featured a mix of Greek and Egyptian cuisine, reflecting her dual heritage. It would include bread, beer, a staple of the Egyptian diet, fish from the Nile, and fruits like figs and dates. Her afternoons were for diplomacy and public appearances. She would meet with ambassadors from Rome and other foreign powers. Her famous meetings with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were masterstrokes of political theater. She carefully staged these encounters to showcase her wealth, her intelligence, and her divine status. When she sailed up the River Cydnus to meet Antony, she did so on a magnificent golden barge, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite. This was not just a romantic gesture, it was a power move designed to awe and intimidate the Roman general. She also understood the importance of public ceremony. She would have participated in religious festivals, making offerings at the temples to honor the Egyptian gods. By presenting herself as a traditional pharaoh, she solidified her legitimacy in the eyes of the Egyptian people. Her evenings were legendary. The banquets she hosted were extravagant affairs designed to display the immense wealth of Egypt. They featured exotic foods, the finest wines, and entertainment from musicians and dancers, but even these parties were political. They were opportunities to build alliances, gather information, and charm potential allies. The conversations were as important as the food. Cleopatra's daily routine was a constant performance. Every decision, from the language she spoke to the makeup she wore, was a calculated political act. She used her intellect, her charm, and the wealth of her kingdom to navigate the treacherous political landscape of her time. Her day was a testament to her skill as a ruler who understood that in the game of power, image and substance were one and the same. Number 12. How did Isabella I of Castile run a war from horseback? She and her husband, Ferdinand of Aragon, were known as the Catholic monarchs, a title given to them by the Pope. She was a major patron of Christopher Columbus, funding his voyage that led to the European arrival in the Americas after he had been rejected by several other monarchs. She established a permanent military hospital during the Granada War, one of the first of its kind. She was a devoted mother to 5 children, including Catherine of Aragon, the future first wife of Henry V of England. Isabella I's daily routine was that of a warrior queen on a mission. Her life was defined by her 3 great projects, uniting Spain under a single crown, completing the Reconquista by conquering the last Muslim kingdom of Granada, and enforcing religious uniformity. Her schedule was relentless, mobile, and deeply intertwined with both military campaigning and intense religious piety. Her day began before dawn with prayer. Isabella was intensely devout, and her faith guided every decision she made. She would spend a significant amount of time with her confessor and attending Mass. This spiritual fortification was essential for the difficult tasks she faced. Unlike queens who were confined to their palaces, Isabella spent much of her reign on the move. When her armies were in the field during the long Granada War, she was not far behind. Her court was a mobile military camp. Her routine involved riding for hours on horseback, often in difficult terrain and harsh weather. She was a constant presence among her troops, a visible symbol of royal authority and determination. She would inspect the soldiers, manage the supply lines, and tend to the sick and wounded. Her creation of field hospitals, staffed with doctors and surgeons, dramatically improved the survival rate of her soldiers and boosted their morale. Her workday on campaign was run from a tent. Surrounded by maps and military advisors, she was the chief administrator of the war effort. She was in charge of logistics, finance, and strategy. While Ferdinand was often the field commander, Isabella was the one who made sure the army was paid, fed, and equipped. She was known for her organizational skills and her unwavering resolve. She would dictate letters to her commanders, negotiate with foreign envoys, and deal with the complex politics of her own nobles, all from a temporary headquarters near the front lines. Meals were practical and often taken on the go. There was little time for the elaborate banquets of a peaceful court. The focus was on efficiency and maintaining the momentum of the campaign. Even in the midst of war, she was a hands-on mother. Her children traveled with the court camp. She supervised their education, ensuring they were well-versed in religion, languages, and politics. She was grooming them to be rulers and to forge strategic alliances through marriage. Her tent was not just a command center, but also a schoolroom and a nursery. When she was not on campaign and was residing in one of her palaces, her routine was more settled, but no less demanding. Her mornings were still dedicated to prayer and then hours of administrative work. She and Ferdinand governed jointly a unique political arrangement for the time. They would meet together, review documents, and issue decrees. They had a famous motto, tanto monta, monta tanto, Isabel como Fernando, meaning they amount to the same, Isabel as Ferdinand. Her afternoons would be spent in audiences, meeting with her subjects, hearing their grievances, and dispensing justice. She believed in being an accessible monarch and took this duty seriously. She also oversaw the beginnings of the Spanish Inquisition, a dark chapter of her reign that was driven by her goal of religious unity. Isabella's routine was a testament to her incredible energy and force of will. She was a queen who ruled not from a throne, but from the saddle and the writing desk. Her days were a blur of prayer, paperwork, and military planning. She was the driving force behind the creation of modern Spain, and her daily life reflected the constant, relentless effort required to forge a new nation. Number 11 was Empress Theodora's path, the secret to her power. She began her life not as a noble, but as an actress and comedian in Constantinople, a profession considered scandalous at the time. The law had to be specifically changed by her future husband, Emperor Justinian, so that he, a royal, could legally marry her, a former actress. During the Nika riots, when Justinian was ready to flee the city, it was Theodora who convinced him to stay and fight, saving his throne. She was a champion for the rights of women, passing laws against forced prostitution and granting women more rights in divorce cases. Empress Theodora's daily routine in the great palace of Constantinople was a far cry from her early life in the theater, but she brought the same sharp intelligence and steel will to both. Her day was a careful exercise in wielding the immense power she had fought so hard to obtain, always at the side of her husband, Emperor Justinian. Theodora would have risen in the lavish imperial apartments, surrounded by mosaics and silks. Her morning routine was one of transformation. The former actress now had to embody the sacred and remote status of a Byzantine empress. This involved an elaborate dressing ceremony attended by her ladies in waiting. Her robes were made of Tyrian purple, a dye so expensive it was reserved exclusively for the emperor and empress. They were heavily embroidered with gold thread and pearls. Her headdress would have been laden with jewels. This was not just fashion, it was a uniform of power, designed to inspire awe and reverence. After a morning of prayer, a central part of life in the deeply religious Byzantine court, her political day would begin. Theodora was not a passive empress consort. She was Justinian's most trusted advisor and co-ruler in all but name. She had her own set of apartments and her own court, where she would receive officials, petitioners, and foreign envoys. She was known for her sharp mind and her ability to cut through flattery and get to the heart of an issue. Her experiences in the rough and tumble world of the theater had given her an understanding of human nature that the palace-born Justinian lacked. She would spend hours in meetings, often separate from her husband, gathering information and forming her own opinions. Then she and Justinian would confer. They were a true political partnership. They discussed everything law, theology, military strategy, and appointments to high office. Many of the major legal reforms of Justinian's reign, known as the Justinian Code, show her influence, particularly those that improved the status of women. The imperial meals were grand, formal affairs governed by rigid ceremony. The emperor and empress were seen as God's representatives on earth, and every action they took was imbued with symbolic meaning. They would eat from golden plates surrounded by their court, but the atmosphere was one of solemnity, not boisterous celebration. Her afternoons might be spent overseeing her own political and charitable projects. She established a convent for former prostitutes, giving them a safe place to live and rebuild their lives. This was a cause deeply personal to her, reflecting a desire to help women who had faced the same social scorn she once had. She was a shrewd political operator, building her own network of loyal followers and using her influence to promote her allies and sideline her rivals. Theodora also understood the importance of ceremony and public appearance. She and Justinian would appear before the people on high holy days, presiding over ceremonies in the magnificent Hagia Sophia or at the Hippodrome, the great stadium for chariot races. These appearances were carefully managed to reinforce their sacred authority. Theodora, with her imposing imperial regalia and her confident bearing, was a powerful presence. Her evenings would be spent with Justinian, continuing their work or engaging in theological debates, which were a passion for both of them. Unlike other queens who were relegated to the background, Theodora's daily routine was at the very center of power. She was a full partner in the Renovatio Imperii, the restoration of the empire that defined their reign. Her day was a testament to her journey from the stage to the throne, using the intelligence and resilience she learned in her first life to master her second. Number 10. How did Hatshepsut convince an empire she was king? She was one of the very few female pharaohs in over 3,000 years of ancient Egyptian history. To legitimize her rule, She was often depicted in statues and carvings with a male body and a false beard, the traditional symbols of a king. She oversaw a period of great peace and prosperity, launching a famous trading expedition to the land of Punt, modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. She was a prolific builder, and her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri is one of the architectural marvels of ancient Egypt. Hatshepsut's daily routine was a masterclass in political branding. As a woman ruling in a man's role, every single day was a performance designed to reinforce her legitimacy as pharaoh. Her schedule was a mix of religious ritual, ambitious administration, and careful image management. Her day began at dawn in the royal palace at Thebes. The first and most important duty was religious. The pharaoh was not just a king, he was the chief high priest of Egypt, the intermediary between the gods and the people. Hatshepsut's first act would be to enter the sanctuary of the royal temple. Alone, she would perform the morning rituals for the god Amun-Ra. This involved a ceremonial washing and dressing of the god statue and presenting it with offerings of food and incense. By performing these rites, she was upholding Ma'at, the divine order of the universe, and reaffirming her sacred right to rule. After the temple rituals, she would undergo her own transformation. She would be dressed in the regalia of a king. This included the kilt, the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, and, for formal occasions, the ceremonial false beard strapped to her chin. This was not about denying her gender. It was about adopting the established iconography of power. To rule, she had to look like a ruler, and in ancient Egypt, rulers were male. Her mourning would then be dedicated to the business of government. She would hold an audience in the great hall of the palace. The scribes would stand ready with their palettes and papyrus scrolls. She would meet with her vizier, her chief minister, to discuss the affairs of the state. They would review tax collections, reports from provincial governors, and the progress of her many building projects. Hatshepsut was an ambitious builder. She commissioned hundreds of new constructions, from obelisks at the Temple of Karnak to her own magnificent mortuary temple. Her routine would have involved regular meetings with her chief architect, Senenmut, to go over plans and designs. The midday meal would be a private affair, a break from the public performance of kingship. The Egyptian elite enjoyed a varied diet of bread, beer, beef, poultry, fish, and a wide variety of fruits and vegetables. The afternoon was a time for inspection and public duties. She might be carried in a litter to visit a construction site, to see the progress on a new temple or a towering obelisk. These visits were not just for oversight, they were public relations events. It showed the people that their pharaoh was active, engaged, in bringing prosperity to the land. She also oversaw major trade initiatives, most famously the expedition to Punt. Her routine would have included hearing the reports from the sailors and merchants who returned with exotic goods like incense, ebony, and wild animals, which were then dedicated to the gods. Their religious duties would continue throughout the day. The Egyptian calendar was filled with festivals and ceremonies dedicated to various gods. As pharaoh, Hatshepsut would have been the lead participant in these public rituals, further cementing the bond between her rule and the divine. Her evenings were likely spent in the relative privacy of the royal apartments. She would dine with her daughter, Neferyur, and her closest advisors. This would be a time to relax the strictures of her public male persona. Here, she could be a mother and a woman, even as she continued to strategize for the next day of her unprecedented reign. Her entire routine was a careful balancing act, blending the traditional duties of a pharaoh with the unique challenge of being a woman on the throne. Every sunrise brought a new need to prove she was not just a queen, but a king. Number 9, did Anne Boleyn's fashion choices lead to a revolution? She refused to be Henry V's mistress, holding out for marriage and the crown for nearly 7 years. She was a key figure in promoting the English Reformation, not just for personal reasons, but because she was a supporter of religious reform ideas. She introduced the French hood, a style of headdress that was far more revealing of a woman's hair than the traditional English gable hood, setting a new fashion trend. Her personal motto was "the most happy." Anne Boleyn's daily routine as Queen of England was a whirlwind of high-stakes politics, lavish court life, and the constant crushing pressure to produce a male heir. Her schedule was designed to display her newfound status and to advance her political and religious agenda. Her day began relatively early in her opulent chambers at palaces like Greenwich or Hampton Court. She would be attended by her ladies in waiting, who were carefully chosen from prominent families to create a network of support for her. Her dressing was a significant event. Anne was a renowned fashion icon. She brought a sophisticated French style to the English court. She favored elegant gowns of dark velvets and satins, and her famous French hood showed off her dark hair. Her appearance was a statement of her worldliness and her break with the old-fashioned style of her predecessor, Catherine of Aragon. After dressing, she would attend morning prayers in her private chapel. Anne was a genuinely pious woman with a strong interest in the new religious ideas of the Reformation. She owned a copy of William Tyndale's English translation of the Bible, which was considered heretical at the time. She would spend time reading scripture and devotional texts, often in French or English rather than Latin, which was another subtle shift from the old traditions. Her official duties as queen began after breakfast. She was an active and influential political player. She would meet with ministers, ambassadors, and petitioners. She used her position to promote her allies and to push for religious reform. She championed the appointment of reformist bishops and encouraged the distribution of English-language Bibles. She was not just Henry's wife, she was his partner in creating the new Church of England. She would often discuss matters of state with Henry directly, and he valued her sharp intellect and political instincts. The main meal of the day was dinner, served around 10 a.m. This was a grand public affair in the Great Hall. The Queen and King would sit at a high table, and the entire court would be seated according to their rank. The meal consisted of dozens of courses, featuring everything from roasted swan to intricate sugar sculptures. This was a daily display of the Tudor dynasty's power and wealth. The afternoon was filled with the traditional pastimes of the court, but for Anne, these were also political activities. She might go hunting or practice archery, skills at which she was said to be proficient. She would play cards, listen to music performed by her court musicians, or engage in witty conversation. The court was a hotbed of gossip and intrigue, and these social moments were crucial for gathering information and maintaining her influence. She presided over a sophisticated and cultured court, a stark contrast to the more somber court of Queen Catherine. She also had a duty to manage her own household, which was a massive enterprise with hundreds of staff. And above all, she had the constant, ever-present duty to provide Henry with a son. Her every action was scrutinized for signs of pregnancy. Her daily routine was dictated by this biological imperative. Evenings brought more courtly entertainments. There would be dancing, masques, and music. Anne was a skilled dancer and musician herself. These events were another opportunity to shine, to display her grace and charm, and to solidify her position at the center of the court. After a late supper, she would retire, the pressure to secure her dynasty with a male heir following her into her dreams. Her routine was a glamorous but precarious performance on a public stage where one misstep could mean losing everything. Number 8 was Mary I's daily routine, an act of defiance. Before she became queen, she was declared illegitimate by her father, Henry Vede, and was forced to serve as a lady in waiting to her own infant half-sister, Elizabeth. She was a highly accomplished musician, known for her skill at playing the virginals. She was fluent in Latin and spoke several other languages. She was the first ever queen to rule England in her own right, not as a consort. Mary I's daily routine was a solemn and determined effort to turn back the tide of history. As England's first reigning queen, and a devout Catholic, her schedule was built around two goals: re-establishing the Catholic faith in England and proving that a woman could rule as effectively as a man. Her day was anchored by religion. She would rise early and spend a considerable amount of time in private prayer. She would then attend Mass, often several times a day. The Catholic rituals that had been suppressed by her father and brother were the heart of her court. The sound of Latin chants and the smell of incense once again filled the royal chapels. For Mary, this was not just personal piety, it was a public declaration that the old faith had returned. After her morning devotions, she would turn to the business of government. Mary was an incredibly conscientious ruler. She would sit for hours with her Privy Council, debating policy. She was not a figurehead. She listened to her advisors, but the final decisions were hers. Her primary focus was the systematic undoing of the English Reformation. This involved repealing anti-papal legislation, restoring monastic lands, and negotiating with the Vatican. It was complex, painstaking work that consumed her days. Her midday dinner was a formal affair, but her court was more somber and Spanish influenced than the lively court of her father. After her marriage to Philip II of Spain, Spanish etiquette and fashion became more prominent. Mary herself dressed modestly, favoring dark colors. The afternoon was dedicated to more work. She would read and sign state papers, meet with foreign ambassadors, and grant audiences. She took her responsibilities as a ruler with the utmost seriousness. She was determined to prove wrong those who, like the reformer John Knox, believed that female rule was a monstrosity. She sought to project an image of a grave, dignified, and capable sovereign. Unlike her sister Elizabeth, Mary did not seem to take great pleasure in the traditional courtly pastimes like hunting and dancing. Her leisure time was often spent on more quiet pursuits. She was a gifted musician and would play the virginals or the lute. She also enjoyed playing cards and walking in the palace gardens. A significant part of her daily thoughts and routine revolved around her husband, Philip, and her desperate desire for an heir. She was deeply in love with him, but he spent much of their marriage abroad, governing his own vast empire. She wrote him frequent, often poignant letters. Her daily schedule was twice disrupted by phantom pregnancies. Believing she was with child, she would go into confinement, following the traditional royal birthing rituals, only to be met with crushing disappointment. Her evenings were quiet. After a light supper, there would be more prayers. Her court was not known for its late-night revelry. Her routine was a reflection of her personality, devout, serious, and deeply committed to her cause. It was a life of high-stakes political struggle, fought not on a battlefield, but in the council chamber and the chapel. Every mass she attended, every law she signed, was an act of defiance against the legacy of her father. Number 7 was Eleanor of Aquitaine's life, just a series of power lunches. She was queen of 2 different countries, first France and then England, and was the mother of 2 English kings, Richard the Lionheart and John. She was one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in Europe for most of the 12th century. She participated in the Second Crusade, leading her own vassals from Aquitaine to the Holy Land. After she separated from her second husband, King Henry II, she established her own glittering court in Poitiers, which became a center of art, poetry, and the ideals of courtly love. Eleanor of Aquitaine's daily routine changed dramatically throughout her long and eventful life, but it was always centered on the acquisition and exercise of power. Her schedule was that of a CEO of a massive medieval conglomerate managing lands, armies, and dynastic alliances. As Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, her early routine was about governing her vast and wealthy duchy in southwestern France. Her day would have started with mass, followed by meetings with her barons and administrators. She would have reviewed accounts, settled legal disputes, and planned the defense of her territory. Aquitaine was a culturally vibrant region, and her court was a hub for poets and troubadours. A typical afternoon for Eleanor would involve not just politics, but listening to poetry, enjoying music, and fostering the arts. When she became Queen of France, her routine shifted. She was now at the formal and pious French court, which she found stifling. Her days were more ceremonial, centered around her husband, King Louis VII. However, she was not one to sit on the sidelines. Her insistence on joining the Second Crusade was shocking for the time. Her routine on crusade was that of a commander. She traveled with her own troops and supplies, a queen in a military camp. Her days were spent on horseback, dealing with logistics and the hardships of the long march. Her most powerful phase began when she became Queen of England, after marrying Henry II. Her routine was now peripatetic, constantly moving. The English court did not have a fixed capital. It traveled relentlessly around England and its territories in France. A typical day for Eleanor involved waking up in a different castle every few weeks, overseeing the packing and unpacking of the entire royal household, a massive logistical feat. Her morning would be spent managing her vast estates and her own household. She had significant personal wealth and lands to administer. As queen, she was also a major patron, receiving petitions and distributing favors. The midday meal was the main political event of the day. The power lunch was where the business of the kingdom was conducted. At the dinner table, alliances were forged, disputes were settled, and information was exchanged. Eleanor, seated next to the king, was at the center of this web. Even after her relationship with Henry soured and he imprisoned her for 16 years, she maintained a routine. She was kept under a form of house arrest in various castles, but she was still the Duchess of Aquitaine. She continued to manage her affairs through letters and trusted agents. Her most active period came in her old age. After Henry's death, her son Richard the Lionheart became king and immediately released her. Now in her late 60s, her routine became even more demanding. She ruled as regent while Richard was on the Third Crusade. Her days were a whirlwind of activity. She governed England, raised the enormous ransom needed to free Richard when he was captured, and put down a rebellion by her other son, John. She traveled across her domains, a whirlwind of political energy, negotiating with nobles, and securing the kingdom. Even into her 70s and 80s, her routine involved long journeys on horseback to arrange dynastic marriages for her granddaughters. Eleanor of Aquitaine never really retired. Her daily routine for nearly 70 years was the relentless work of building and maintaining a dynasty. Number 6 was Razia Sultana's biggest challenge, ruling while male. She was the first and only female ruler of the Delhi Sultanate in India. Her own father chose her as his successor over her brothers, whom he considered incompetent. To assert her authority, she abandoned traditional female attire and adopted the tunic and headdress of a male ruler. She would ride an elephant into battle at the head of her armies. Razia Sultana's daily routine was a radical and courageous performance of kingship in a world that believed women were unfit to rule. Her every action, from the moment she woke, was a calculated move to establish her authority and command the respect of the powerful Turkish nobles who dominated the court. Her day began not in the secluded women's quarters, the zenana, but in the public sphere of the court. Her first and most defiant act was her daily dressing. She cast aside the veil and the traditional flowing robes of a noble Muslim woman. Instead, she donned the kaba, a tunic, and the kula, a conical hat, the official attire of a male sovereign. This was not a fashion statement, it was a political manifesto. It signaled that she was not a regent or a figurehead, but the sultan in her own right. After morning prayers, her work began in the audience hall. She abandoned the use of a screen or curtain, which previous female royals might have used. She sat on the throne, her face visible to all, and conducted the business of the state. She would listen to petitions from her subjects, pass judgments in legal cases, and meet with her ministers. She was known for being a just and accessible ruler, and her subjects respected her. A significant part of her routine was dedicated to military matters. The Delhi Sultanate was a military state, and its ruler had to be a commander. Razia took this role seriously. She would review her troops, inspect their equipment, and plan military strategy. Her most dramatic public appearance was when she would ride out from the palace on a war elephant, just as a male sultan would, to lead her armies. This was a powerful spectacle designed to quash any doubts about her ability to defend the sultanate. Her administrative routine was focused on strengthening her rule. She established a network of loyal officials, some of whom she promoted from non-Turkish backgrounds, which angered the established noble factions. She worked on improving the infrastructure of her kingdom, building roads and digging wells. She was an active and engaged ruler, not a distant figurehead. Unlike many rulers whose days were filled with lavish feasts and entertainment, Razia's routine appears to have been more austere and work-focused. The historical records emphasize her political and military activities, not her social life. Her time was consumed by the constant need to outmaneuver her political rivals and to prove her competence. Her day was a constant battle against prejudice. The Turkish nobles, who saw themselves as the kingmakers, resented taking orders from a woman. Her every decision was scrutinized in a way a male ruler's would not have been. Her routine was a testament to her courage and her belief in her own right to rule. She lived her life in the public eye, deliberately breaking with convention every single day to hold onto the throne her father had entrusted to her. Number 5, did Queen Liliuokalani write music as a form of protest? She was an incredibly talented musician and composer who wrote over 150 songs during her lifetime. Her most famous song, Aloha Dash, Farewell to Thee, became a national anthem of sorts for Hawaii. She was the first and only reigning queen of the Kingdom of Hawaii and its last monarch. After she was overthrown, she was imprisoned in a single room in her own palace for nearly 8 months. Queen Liliuokalani's daily routine tells a story of two different lives, one as a reigning monarch trying to preserve her nation's sovereignty, and the other as a political prisoner fighting to keep its memory alive. As queen, her day at the Iolani Palace in Honolulu was a blend of modern governance and ancient Hawaiian tradition. She would begin her day with Christian prayers, as her family had converted to Christianity, but she also held a deep respect for traditional Hawaiian beliefs and culture. Her mornings were consumed with the duties of a constitutional monarch. She would meet with her cabinet ministers to discuss legislation, foreign affairs, and the economy. A major part of her routine was dealing with the increasing power of American and European business interests, particularly the sugar planters, who were pushing for more control over the islands. She would spend hours reading documents, drafting responses, and trying to navigate a political landscape that was becoming increasingly hostile to Hawaiian sovereignty. She was a dedicated and accessible ruler. She would hold audiences for her people, listening to their concerns. She was particularly passionate about education and the welfare of her subjects. She founded the Liliuokalani Trust for Destitute Children, which continues its work to this day. The afternoons were often dedicated to her cultural passions. Music was the great love of her life. She would spend hours at her piano composing songs. For her, music was not just a hobby, it was a way of expressing her love for her people and her land. She would work on melodies, write lyrics, and collaborate with her Royal Hawaiian Band. Court life was a mix of Western and Hawaiian traditions. She would host formal balls and receptions in the grand European style of Iolani Palace, but these events would also feature traditional hula and Hawaiian music. This routine was shattered in 1893 when a group of American-backed businessmen overthrew her government. Her life changed overnight. Her new routine became one of resistance and diplomacy. She spent her days writing letters of protest to the U.S. government, appealing to international law, and trying to rally support for her cause. Then came her darkest chapter, her imprisonment. In 1895, she was arrested and confined to an upstairs bedroom in Iolani Palace. Her routine became one of stark survival and defiance. She was denied visitors and newspapers for months. To pass the crushing hours, she turned to her passions. She would sew a crazy quilt, stitching in cryptic messages and symbols related to the overthrow. Most importantly, she composed music. She used scraps of newspaper to write down her compositions. Music became her form of protest, her connection to the outside world, and her way of processing her grief. Her routine was reduced to the four walls of her room, but her mind and her spirit remained free through her creativity. After her release, her daily routine was that of a private citizen, but she never stopped fighting for her people and the restoration of their kingdom until her death. Her life's schedule shows a tragic journey from a ruler's busy diary to a prisoner's empty hours, filled only with memory and music. Number 4. How did Empress Taitu Batul co-rule an empire without a formal title? She was the founder of Ethiopia's capital city, Addis Ababa, which means new flower. She was a brilliant military strategist who played a crucial role in Ethiopia's victory over Italy at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, a landmark moment in the history of African resistance to colonialism. She was a shrewd diplomat who was deeply suspicious of European intentions in Africa. She was married to Emperor Menelik II, and their partnership was so effective they were often considered co-rulers. Empress Taitu Batul's daily routine was that of a political powerhouse and a nation builder. She was not a quiet consort who remained in the background. She was an active, vocal, and influential partner in the governance of the Ethiopian Empire. Her days were a mix of sharp political maneuvering, domestic management, and strategic planning. Her day at the Imperial Palace in Addis Ababa would begin with devotions. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church was a central pillar of the empire in her life, and she was a deeply pious woman. After prayers, her political work began immediately. Teitu did not have a formal government title beyond Empress, but she operated as her husband's most trusted advisor and chief minister. While Emperor Menelik II was known for his patient and sometimes accommodating nature, Teitu was famously decisive and uncompromising, especially with foreign powers. Their morning routine often involved a good cop, bad cop dynamic. Menelik would meet with foreign diplomats and listen politely to their proposals. Then, those same diplomats would have to face Teitu. Her court was a center of political activity separate from the emperor's. She would spend her mornings meeting with her own network of loyal nobles, officials, and informants. She had a keen understanding of court politics and used her influence to place her allies in key positions. She would review treaties and government documents and was known for her sharp eye. She famously unraveled an Italian treaty that, through a subtle difference in the Italian and Amharic versions, sought to make Ethiopia a protectorate of Italy. Her daily scrutiny prevented her country from being tricked into colonialism. The imperial court hosted a massive daily feast, or gibber, which was a key part of the routine of governance. Thousands of people, from high nobles to common soldiers, would be fed at the palace. This was not just a meal, it was a political tool. It built loyalty and allowed the emperor and empress to be seen by their people. Teitu, as the head of the imperial household, would have overseen the immense logistics of feeding this small army every single day. Her afternoons were often dedicated to her own projects. The most significant of these was the founding and development of Addis Ababa. She chose the location and oversaw the city's early growth. Her routine would have involved meeting with planners, assigning plots of land, and managing the new capital's resources. She was also a military strategist. In the lead-up to the Battle of Adwa, her daily routine was consumed with war preparations. She mobilized her own large army to join the imperial forces. During the campaign, she was on the front lines with her husband. Her days were spent managing supply lines, caring for the wounded, and providing strategic advice. Her plan to control the local water supply was a key factor in the Ethiopian victory. And Empress Teitu's routine was that of a ruler in every sense of the word. She was a diplomat, a city planner, a political boss, and a military commander. She wielded immense power not through a formal title, but through her intelligence, her force of will, and her unbreakable partnership with her husband. Her day was a testament to how a powerful woman could shape the destiny of a nation. Number 3. Did Mary, Queen of Scots, spend her days plotting or praying? She was Queen of Scotland at only 6 days old and became Queen Consort of France at 16. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, towering over most of her contemporaries, including her cousin Queen Elizabeth I, whom she never met. She spent 19 years in captivity in England. During her imprisonment, her letters, written in complex codes, were intercepted and used as the primary evidence to convict her of treason. Mary, Queen of Scots' daily routine was a life of stark contrasts from the opulent, carefree days as a young queen in France to the rigid, monotonous schedule of a long-term political prisoner in England. In her early years as Queen of France, her day was a fairy tale of Renaissance court life. She would wake late, surrounded by her Scottish and French ladies in waiting, known as the Four Marys. Her mornings were filled with fashion, poetry, and music. She would be dressed in lavish French gowns, a stark contrast to the more somber Scottish style. She would listen to poets like Ronsard, practice the lute, and plan the next court masque or ball. Politics was a distant concern handled by her powerful guise uncles. When she returned to Scotland as a young widow to rule in her own right, her routine became far more serious. She was a Catholic queen in a country increasingly dominated by Protestant lords. Her day became a careful balancing act. She would start her day with a private Catholic Mass in her chapel at Holyrood Palace, an act of defiance against the Protestant establishment. Her mornings were then filled with meetings of the Scottish Privy Council. She had to contend with fiery reformers like John Knox and ambitious, often treacherous nobles. She was an intelligent and charming woman, and she used these skills to try and win over her opponents. Her afternoons were for escaping the political pressures. She was a skilled horsewoman and loved to hunt. These long rides through the Scottish countryside were her moments of freedom. Her evenings were for bringing a touch of French glamour to the rough Scottish court, with music, dancing, and elegant suppers. Everything changed after she fled to England seeking her cousin Elizabeth I's help. Instead of help, she found imprisonment. For the next 19 years, her routine was one of confinement. Her days were meticulously scheduled and controlled by her captors. She would wake in her guarded apartments in a series of English castles and country houses. A large part of her day was dedicated to her Catholic faith, which became her primary source of comfort. She would spend hours in prayer and reading devotional books. Another significant portion of her day was spent on intricate embroidery. She was a highly skilled needlewoman, and her work was often filled with symbolic and allegorical messages. This was one of the few creative and expressive outlets she had left. The most dangerous part of her daily routine was her correspondence. She spent hours every day writing letters in a complex cipher. She wrote to her supporters in Scotland and across Europe, trying to secure her release and reclaim her throne. This letter writing was her lifeline to the outside world, but it was also her downfall. Elizabeth's spymaster, Francis Walsingham, had cracked her codes. Her daily routine of secret plotting was being carefully monitored. The letters she spent her days writing would eventually become the chains that led her to the executioner's block. Her schedule in captivity was a monotonous cycle of prayer, needlework, and plotting, a quiet, desperate battle fought with a needle and a pen from within the four walls of a gilded cage. Number 2, did Catherine de' Medici's daily life revolve around poison and power? Despite the dark legends, there is no historical evidence that she ever poisoned anyone. She was a major patron of the arts and architecture, responsible for adding the magnificent Tuileries Palace to the Louvre. She was the mother of 3 French kings. She was an early adopter of the side saddle, which allowed women to ride horses with more modesty and control. Catherine de' Medici's daily routine as queen, and later Queen Mother of France, was a masterclass in survival and political maneuvering in a country torn apart by religious wars. Her schedule was that of a crisis manager, a diplomat, and the ultimate political matriarch. Her day in the Louvre Palace would begin early. As an Italian in the French court, she was initially an outsider. Her routine was built around establishing her authority and securing the future of her Valois children. After her husband, King Henry II, died, she adopted a new, severe style of dress. She wore black for the rest of her life. This was not just a sign of mourning. It was a political statement, a costume of a grave and powerful widow. Much of her mourning was dedicated to correspondence. She was a prolific letter writer. She wrote to her children, to foreign monarchs, to ambassadors, and to the powerful nobles of France. Her letters were her primary tool of diplomacy. She would try to soothe rival factions, negotiate truces between Catholics and Huguenots, French Protestants, and arrange strategic marriages for her children. Her desk was the command center of her political world. She was the de facto ruler of France for decades, governing as regent for her young sons. She would preside over the royal council, where she was often the most pragmatic and clear-headed person in the room. She was surrounded by extremist factions who wanted to annihilate their religious opponents. Catherine's daily routine was a constant effort to find a middle path, to hold the fractured kingdom together through compromise and negotiation. The midday meal was a formal affair, but for Catherine, it was another political arena. She used lavish court festivals and banquets as a way to project royal power and to distract her feuding nobles. She was a great impresario of the court. Her entertainments were legendary, featuring elaborate ballets, mock naval battles, and theatricals. Planning these massive events was a key part of her routine. They were designed to show that the Valois dynasty was still in control. Catherine also had a deep interest in architecture and the arts. Part of her afternoon might be spent reviewing plans with her architects for the expansion of the Louvre or the construction of her new palace. She saw these grand building projects as a way to leave a lasting legacy and to glorify the French monarchy. She was also a devoted, if controlling, mother. She was deeply involved in the lives of her children. Her routine involved spending time with them, advising them, and sometimes scolding them. Her letters to them are full of both political advice and maternal affection. Her evenings were not for rest. The political maneuvering continued late into the night. She would have private meetings trying to broker deals and diffuse tensions. She walked a constant tightrope. Her routine was a relentless, exhausting balancing act. While legends paint her as a sinister poisoner, her actual daily life was that of a tireless political operator who spent 30 years trying to steer the ship of state through a hurricane of religious fanaticism, using every tool she had, from letters and laws to lavish parties, to keep France from tearing itself apart. Number 1. What if Wu Zetian's routine was the most ruthless CEO schedule in history? She was the only woman in the entire history of China to rule as emperor in her own right, establishing her own dynasty, the Zhou. She started her career at court as a junior concubine to Emperor Taizong. She created her own secret police force to eliminate her political rivals. She was a skilled poet and calligrapher. She made Buddhism the state religion over Taoism, a major cultural shift. Wu Zetian's daily routine was that of an ambitious, brilliant, and utterly ruthless executive who engineered a hostile takeover of the Tang dynasty and then ran it as her own personal corporation. Her schedule was a testament to her insatiable appetite for power and her genius for political strategy. Her day began in the vast palace complex at the capital, Chang'an or Luoyang. It would start before dawn. As emperor, she took on all the ceremonial and political duties traditionally reserved for men. The first part of her morning was the court audience. Seated on the dragon throne, she would meet with her hundreds of ministers and officials. This was a grand and intimidating spectacle. Wu was known for her intelligence and her formidable memory. She would question her ministers sharply, expecting them to be perfectly prepared. She did not suffer fools, and an official who gave a poor report could find himself demoted or dismissed by the end of the meeting. After the formal audience, her real work began. She would retire to her private study to deal with the mountains of paperwork that came with running a huge empire. She would read memorials, which were reports and petitions sent in from all over China. She was a micromanager who took a keen interest in all aspects of government, from military appointments in the far west to tax policy in the southern provinces. A key and chilling part of her daily routine involved her secret police. She had established a network of informants and agents whose job was to uncover plots against her. Part of her day would be spent reading their secret reports and deciding the fate of those accused of disloyalty. She ruled through a climate of fear, and a word from her could lead to an official's ruin. She was also a master of propaganda. Her routine included meetings with scholars and Buddhist monks to promote a narrative that legitimized her rule. They discovered ancient texts that prophesied the reign of a female sovereign and declared her to be a reincarnation of the Maitreya Buddha. She used religion and scholarship as powerful tools to justify her unprecedented position. Wu Zetian also understood the importance of talent. Frustrated with the old aristocracy, she expanded the civil service examination system. Part of her routine was to personally review the results and sometimes even interview the top candidates herself. She wanted to recruit the brightest minds in China to serve her government, regardless of their family background. This was a savvy move that created a new class of officials loyal directly to her. Her afternoons might be dedicated to her personal interests. She was a patron of the arts and a talented poet. She would spend time practicing calligraphy or composing verse. She also oversaw grand construction projects, including enormous Buddhist statues and new palace halls. Her evenings were not for relaxation. She would often continue working late into the night, reading reports or holding private meetings. She outworked and outthought all of her rivals. Her daily routine was relentless and all-consuming. It was the schedule of a person who had clawed their way to the absolute pinnacle of power and was determined to never let it go. She didn't just break the rules, she rewrote them, and her daily schedule was the instrument she used to enforce her new reality.